As we wait for the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, to emerge from where he is working from home, I have a few correspondents with me. David Aiken is in Ottawa. David, you're at home. Oh, no, you're actually in the studio today, aren't you? You're one of the few people.
I'm in the studio.
One of our few people who came into the office today. David, I guess we should start with the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Office. Economic, they're not calling it a forecast so much as a scenario for the coming year.
Yeah, and they sort of underline that, saying this is just, an imagining of one kind of future. And because the situation changes so rapidly from day to day, both the health situation and the economic situation, the PBO is saying, their forecast is almost certainly, or this scenario is almost certainly to change. And you pointed out when you talked about where the deficit may go next year, a deficit almost 4 times as big as we once thought. The PBO is saying we did those numbers before the federal government early this week increased its benefit package. But if there's any little bit of good news in what the PBO said today, it's this. The PBO is saying that the federal government's fiscal position was in relatively good shape. And I know there'll be conservative-minded voters out there who'll argue this point, saying a, quote, $30 billion deficit is not good shape and we should have balanced the books. I get that there's that argument to make. But most economists, the PBO, Bay Street economists, all say that relative to the size of our economy, our deficit was very small. And that has given us, or gives us as a country, the ability to borrow more. And with this interest rate cut overnight, now 0.25%, the cost of borrowing is way below the cost of inflation. And that means that our federal government, if it should, and it likely will have to, spend billions more, borrow billions more to support businesses and workers, the PBO saying it should have the room to do so. And that may be where some of the public policy debate now goes in terms of how much can we borrow? Should we be borrowing? I know there's still a lot of business groups out there saying, particularly for small business, looking to the federal government for some help, perhaps in terms of a wage subsidy that matches what European countries are doing. The PBO would be giving some cover, I think, today to the federal government to say, if you need to borrow some more money to do that, and we're talking borrowing billions, you've got the room to do so.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Bank of Canada governor used a good line today. He said a firefighter never gets criticized for using too much water. But I guess the question is, how many mechanisms does he really have? If the interest rate, Bank of Canada rate is now 0.25%, really can't get much lower than that. Are there any other mechanisms he can employ?
Yeah, the bank is using a phrase called, this is the effective lower bound. And in non-bank speak, that means interest rates pretty much, they don't go much lower, or 0.25%. And in fact, the bank is doing something that the economists call quantitative easing, QE. And this is a term you may hear more and more from central banks around the world. And what that means is the bank is now buying up essentially debt from governments and in businesses. And what you need to know about that is the effect of that is it frees up credit. It helps banks have more money at lower risk to be able to lend to businesses. So the bank is ready to continue to do that. In the United States, the Fed has already signaled sky's the limit. They will start doing this quantitative easing to push money into credit markets so businesses can borrow. So that's one thing the bank is doing. One more thing, the PBO didn't get into this, Don. I think it's worth flagging. While the PBO said the federal government's fiscal shape is in pretty good shape, has room to borrow, a lot of provinces are not in nearly good fiscal shape. In fact, the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, it's now looking at needing a couple of billions just to meet its ongoing payroll. It's in terrible financial shape, brought on a lot by dropping oil prices. Alberta and Saskatchewan, Alberta particularly as well, went into this with a big deficit relative to its economy. It should be okay, but the provincial finances, and of course, provincial finances are all backstopped by the federal government. They'll be different from province to province. TD Bank was out this morning with its latest look at provincial forecasts, and it says that this economic hit we're going to take is really going to vary by province. And you won't be surprised to hear Quebec and Ontario probably in the best shape to weather this. Quebec and Ontario went into this crisis with relatively robust finances. Their economies are on the pickup. And of course, it was those energy producing provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador, that went into this already in tough shape. And of course, what was the joke yesterday? That a barrel of oil from Alberta now is cheaper than an actual barrel of monkeys, believe it or not.
Yeah, it is kind of impossible to comprehend. The other thing that I heard yesterday is that personal protective equipment that all our frontline medical staff need is now more precious than oil. And I expect that's probably true too.
Yeah, and I expect that will be something we're going to hear from the Prime Minister about today. Some more updates on that. Remember, yesterday he talked about millions of items were on the way from China, from elsewhere. We're trying to ramp up manufacturing domestically, and we spent much of the day trying to get a little more details on that as well. I expect we'll hear more from that from the PM, and then later, when the ministers give their press conferences, we'll want to know that. Frontline workers, firefighters, first responders, healthcare workers, they've got the masks, they've got the gowns, they've got the gloves that they need to help Canadians in this crisis.
Hey, David, quick question about the Prime Minister. He said he's going to continue working from home, though
Yes.
He's technically could emerge from the House now because he's been in this self-isolation for 14 days. Am I right about that?
Yes. Now, we've been trying to get a straight answer from the PMO on, well, as the health authority said he's clear to walk around the city of Ottawa if he wants. So we really can't get a straight answer, but they are telling us this. This is the 16th day of his, quote, isolation, but he wants to do these press conferences from his home at Rideau Cottage to send a message that he's been trying to send all week, which is everybody, if you can work from home, work from home. And so the Prime Minister is trying to demonstrate just that he can, in fact, work from home. And just to loop back to quickly what Boris Johnson, being the Prime Minister of the UK, now diagnosed. Remember, we only have one MP so far who has been diagnosed with COVID-19. That's Kamal Khera, a Brampton West MP. Lots of others been tested and had to self-isolate. Natural Resources Minister Seamus O'Regan had to do that. So did Mary Ng, the Trade Minister, isolated, tested, negative. But so far, just one Canadian MP. That's Kamal Khera.